Hello and welcome to a new, different video. Normally I analyze matches and talk about gameplay. This time, nothing like that. I want to give you my personal tips on how to become a better magician. Now, these are not gameplay tips, okay? These are my personal, non-gameplay related tips, which I think and I hope will make you become a better magician, a better mage in the community, okay? So, my first point, okay, my first tip is use forums wisely, okay? Now, you can be an advanced player, you can be a beginner. The thing here is that forums, especially Discord and Reddit, are filled with random thoughts thrown at each other, okay? Especially if you are newer, you can never be able to decide who's right, who's wrong. It may be very difficult. People all use a lot of superficial logic, like it sounds okay, it has to make sense, right? But it doesn't, because it lacks some detail or format context or something. So please remember to use forums wisely. I think my best bet would be to just avoid like Discords completely, right? Unless you're having fun, obviously. Like, if you like bouncing idea off of each other, you have fun, you like talking with people, obviously. I'm talking about like actual like preparation and seeking advice. If you have someone who has posted a list which you seem to like, just try to ask them directly, okay? Comment under their tweet or send them a direct message and then listen from them, okay, what they have to say. Don't listen to somebody else, what their comment is when they're using some kind of a space like Discord, because people just say a lot of different things and they never come to any agreement on anything whatsoever, okay? So please remember that. 2. Look at card functions. So what I mean is that a lot of cards have texts, okay? Most of them, all of them have text, right? And you see, okay, censor, pay 1, cycle, okay, absorb, counter, gain 3. And now what I like to do is look at functions as in, like, go to the core of that card. So censor for me is turn 2 interaction with the potential of being relevant later, right? And has cycling. Absorb, turn 3 interaction on the stack, potentially later, okay? Seal away, okay, turn 2 interaction, right? Which has exile, which could be relevant, right? Teferi here of Dominaria, win condition with interaction on top. What kind of interaction? Non-land interaction, which can be relevant contrary to other interaction in the deck, which tags creatures mostly. Kind of like go in depth, okay? And look at the deck contextually and the format contextually. Because someone can say, I cut Syncopate from my deck and put Thassa's Intervention in. Because Thassa's Intervention has way higher ceiling and is flexible, can be cut advantage or counterspell. Yeah, sure, but you cut a Syncopate, right, which is a turn 2 interaction from the turn 2 interaction slot and put Thassa's Intervention in, right? Obviously, if we could, we would only play powerful spells, but it's not about that only, right? So please look at the card functions and preferably ask the person who's constructed the deck why. Maybe someone plays 4 censor, let's say, and they play a 5th card. They play a Syncopate, right? And you think, why that one-off? But actually, what this person meant was 5th censor, okay? 5th piece of turn 2 interaction, right? And then cutting it would be against the whole idea of it being there, okay? Because the idea behind it was in the context of the deck and in the context of the format, where you know you need turn 2 interaction, okay? So please look at what cards do, but across the deck and within the context of the format. That's very important. You know, just cutting a card for a similar one it's not the same, right? Maybe people play Seal Away over something else, over Blessed Alliance, because it has exile and it's relevant, right? And because it can be used outside of combat, right? It's not just turn to removal spell. I mean, yes, but there are some things also in it. Okay, the same syncope is not just a counterspell. Okay, counterspell is kind of a function, but I would like you to go a bit in depth into that function. Okay. 3. Don't compare formats to each other. I've seen people all the time saying, I play Standard, and no, this card is excellent in Standard. I'll play it in Pioneer, right? Or, Dig Through Time is too good in Modern and Legacy, so it probably shouldn't be legal in Pioneer, right? Like it used to be before the format was created, at the beginning. So, if you know how to compare them reasonably, sure, but even if, what's the point? Kind of, there is no reason to say that was good in Standard, so yeah, if you say that was good in Standard, so I will test it in Pioneer to see if it has potential, sure, but that's no different from I'll test that, right, without a Standard argument. The point is that you shouldn't put much weight into the fact that it was powerful in Standard, okay? Like, you still have to evaluate the card again in the context of Pioneer, right? Elspeth Conquers Death is an all-star in Blue-White Control in Standard, right? It's near unplayable in Pioneer, right? So because there are other tools, Cast Out, Detention Sphere, and so on, right? So, I would be very careful with comparing formats and drawing conclusions based off of that. Because again, if you say, I will test that because it was good, sure, you can test it. But drawing conclusions, like it was good in Standard, therefore it's good in Pioneer, I would 100% try to avoid that. Classic. Okay? Magic players love irrelevant sample sizes. And I know that someone can say, I cannot realistically play all the games. I cannot realistically play 100 games with one card change. And that's true. If you're thinking about whether to play, let's say, 2 Seal Away or 3 Blessed Alliance, or 3 Seal Away, 2 Blessed Alliance, right? And I would tell you, test 100 games and then see. Preferably play and draw, and preferably against different decks. Obviously, that's impossible, right? Basically, you have to test in such a way that you've got a good perspective. Like, let's say, what's a good perspective? If I make a change in a deck, let's say I add a different counterspell, okay, or Gideon of the Trials. I play 4 leagues. Okay, it's 20 matches, which is not no fewer than 40 games, right? And you can and across different matchups, and you start to see if that card changes the flow of how much it changes. Okay, but I've seen people, like I was a huge, and still am, a huge advocate of Omen of the Sea, and I've had people who say Omen of the Sea is super clunky. Oh, really? Is it super clunky? How many matches have you played? 1. But it feels super clunky. Sure, but you cannot draw a conclusion off of that, because Magic is full of variance, and you have to also account for it. Like, you have to play more. Magic players don't play enough. And they like to speculate on the bans which may happen, and they speculate a lot, and they look at decks on paper, and they don't play. So basically, the conclusion here is just play more, right? But then don't get fixated and tunnel visioned on that one match or matchup, which you've been losing to, or they've had like these nut draws or something. Just don't stay so tunnel visioned. Look at the bigger sample and the bigger sample, okay? It's okay to lose, okay? It's perfectly fine to lose. What I want to say are 2 things here. 1, the best Magic players, whatever they show you on Twitter, me, including me, right, lose 40% of games, 45% of games, right? There are short-term streaks, which I have experienced also, for example, back-to-back 5-0s and so on. Sure, it can happen, and then you short term you've got like 90% win percentage, right? But the point is that long term you will lose if you're doing well. I mean, you'll lose 40%, 45%, right, at best, which means that for every 5-0 someone makes, there probably are a few 2-3s mixed in, and again, that's fine. Okay, what I mean by this is if you take a deck and you 2-3 a league with it, like, it's not the record is not that important. It's about the conclusions you draw from each game and the play patterns, right? If you monitor the fact that how you drew, how you piloted the game, how your opponent played, and so on. If you are on the draw, on the play, if the conclusion from that is this deck is bad, possibly, right? But just the fact that you 2-3'd is not enough, right? It's not enough. Because so that's one thing, right? It's okay if you lose a tournament, 2 tournaments. Again, you will win at best, most probably 60% of the time, 55% of the time. And my second point is matchups. People say, I keep losing to matchup X. I will change something. And that's fine, but sometimes you have to pick and choose what you win against, what you lose against, okay? It's fine if you play a deck that's destroying aggro decks, right? But be called to ramp. It's fine. It's a trade-off, right? Sometimes it's very difficult because then you cut cards to be able to beat ramp, or to be not 30 but to be 40% against ramp, but you do it at the expense of something, right? So you have to pick and choose your percentages, right? When I create control decks, I look at the format, and for example, Pioneer is super creature based, so I want to secure my position against aggro decks first and foremost, right? When I say I'm well positioned against aggro decks, then I can try to see and shape, right? But we've got 4 major macro archetypes. We've got control, combo, ramp, aggro, and you cannot possibly be good against everything, because then your deck would be busted. So again, the conclusion from that point is pick and choose what you're willing to lose to, right? Or how much you're willing to lose to it, okay? Play narrow, high impact sideboard cards. This is my personal philosophy, but what I like doing is to play, again, narrow, high impact sideboard cards. What I mean by it is that I don't play cards like Detention Sphere in my sideboard, because it's like never dead, but it's okay in most things, so you would probably bring it in like 80% of matchups, right? So, and what's the point of 3-mana removal spell, really? In the sideboard, if I'm concerned about like Planeswalkers, I'll play Dovin's Vetoes, I'll play Disputes, right? If I'm concerned about creatures, I play another mass removal spell, or Surge of Righteousness, or Aethergust, or Isolate, or Ram, or Paladin, right? If I'm concerned about aggro and control, combo and control, I can play Monastery Mentor, right? Whose ceiling is obnoxiously high, right? So I don't like playing, again, kind of these always okay cards in the sideboard. I personally really like playing high impact sideboard cards, okay, which my sideboards reflect. Use the word because more often. When you argue or discuss with somebody on Twitter, Discord, Reddit, with your friend, I think Magic players should use the word because more often, okay? So instead of saying Censor is bad, it's much better to say Censor is bad because I think it's irrelevant past turn 3, and cycling that it doesn't affect the board state, for example, right? And then I can discuss with your logic, and I don't, because arguing with the fact that you don't like Censor or you don't play Censor, what can I tell you? Like, you don't play Censor, that's a fact. Now, what I can argue with, and it's way more productive arguably, is to discuss with the logic and your argumentation. So you say, it's irrelevant past turn 3 and cycling doesn't affect the board state. And now I can try to break this down and discuss with that. Okay? However, I have been guilty of that very often, like not using because. And that happens because I am very often asked the same question. So sometimes if someone says, do you like absorb? And I will just say no, because I've been asked about absorb, let's say, 1,000,000 times, right? And I that's just an excuse. But we always should preferably even approach people with because. So for example, do you play absorb? Because I have found it very successful because. And then I feel kind of obligated to respond with my logic, with my view on that point, okay? And again, always the logic and the reasoning behind the choice is better to discuss about than the choice, okay? Don't immediately change someone else's list. Okay, I've seen a lot of people who take someone else's list from Twitter or from PT on Grand Prix, and then they tweak it. They say tweak, but it basically means they make their personal changes and they play it. Now, I cannot force you not to. But the point is that someone else has created the deck the way it is for some very specific reasons, right? Try to see how it plays out. Ask them maybe why they've made some choices, and ask if your changes make sense functionally, for example, right? Like the Thassa sensor absorb things, right? That's important, because maybe if you take a PT list, maybe someone just has metagamed hard for that tournament because they expected X and Y decks, right? And they metagamed heavily, right? And then you go to your LGS, or play a league, or play a Grand Prix, or play a PTQ, and it just doesn't apply there. The same logic, the same card choices don't apply there, right? So if you do copy someone else's list, try to understand that, or preferably try to ask them why they've made some choices, okay? And always be careful, because you can change the deck, change it bad, change it in the wrong way, even though you think it's in a good way. The PT meta is not your LGS, MTGO, GP meta, okay? I think people react, though this is this period of Pro Tours, players tours like Brussels, Phoenix, Nagoya, and people just are like crazy the day after they play the PT list, and obviously the core will be powerful. Right? Most probably the core will be powerful. But PT metas are very specific. There are not that many people. They kind of try to guess and second guess what other people will be playing. They only choose the best decks. And let's be honest, when you play the LGS or MTGO or Grand Prix day one, let's say, people play whatever they like. Pioneer has approached modern level of diversity, I'd say. I mean, obviously not that much, but he's approaching that level. And if someone likes their black-white Auras deck, again, which was huge at the PT Nagoya, now it's it's a deck, another deck, right? Some people play mono-red Eldrazi. Some people play blue-white Thirst Control. Some people play, 5-color Nif Mizzet with some kind of twist they like. Some people play Grixis Control. Or blue-red Dragons with Nif Mizzet. What can you tell them? You will play against these decks, right? It kind of comes back to actually my point about macro archetypes. Because if you're prepared against control in general, you'll be able to fight against blue-red Dragons and Grixis Control. And not only blue-white Control. Point being, the Pro Tour meta, Players Tours meta, is the Players Tours meta, and that's it, okay? It could translate later into the MTGO and LGS meta, but then you have to analyze that. Don't immediately draw a conclusion and change your deck, right? For example, if you've got the Breach deck, which wins the PT, right? Or you've got a combo deck, which wins the PT, it doesn't mean it will be everywhere the next day. It just doesn't. Right? People will adjust as well, right? So I would just always take it with a grain of salt. And my last point. That's an important point. It's probably your fault. When you lose a game, it's probably your fault. Okay? People like kind of really like thinking that they got screwed or flooded, or opponent drew well, or something like that, or they didn't have the proper sideboard card or something. Very often, you have to kind of reflect. For example, you say, oh, I got screwed completely. Sure, but you kept one lander with an opt. Now let's think how on the play. Let's see how reasonable that was. And it could be possible that it is reasonable, but let's think about it, right? You say that, opponent drew well. Sure, but could you not have countered a different spell? Reasonably. Because I'm not talking about being results-oriented. Obviously, I'm not thinking, okay, this is how the match went, okay? Clearly, I shouldn't have taken this line. I mean, when you were in that moment, without future knowledge, would you and could you have realistically made a different decision? And I don't know about you, but I make a lot of mistakes. And I reflect on them all the time. I miss sequence, I forget about some interactions, it just happens and it's a part of the game. Maybe I'm just, below average, but I find myself losing mostly because of my mistakes. I notice them either in the moment or after the match, and I think, oh, how could I have been so dumb? But it makes me improve. It makes me look at things in the future, right? While saying I got screwed doesn't help. Sure, it lets my emotions out and I've got my excuse, oh, so it's fine that I lost. But, and to be clear, I got screwed and got flooded. It happens. I'm talking about kind of being able to see where you got flooded and where it was your fault. Maybe you've mismanaged your resources, okay? You say, oh, I scryed through half of my deck with my castle and I've got only lands. Sure, but between the scries you've done, how many times have you bottomed a spell for X reason? Was it reasonable to do that, right? Maybe it wasn't, because the end result is what it is, but maybe along the way you could have changed the course of action, right? And it can help you be better in the future, right? Because obviously you cannot change the result of the game now. So that would be my tips, okay? So the summary, let's just go through the summary. Use forums wisely. Look at card functions. Don't compare formats to each other. Look at the relevant sample sizes. It's okay to lose. Play narrow high-impact spells in the sideboard. Use the word because more often in discussions. Don't immediately change someone else's list. The PT meta is not the same as the meta you play in. And it's probably your fault that you lost. Thank you very much for watching. You can find me at on Twitter, Islands in Front, and YouTube, Islands in Front. Thank you very much. Hold my hand. Let's pass the turn together. Cheers.